So let's see what these Burp Suite other modules is actually going to cover. Alongside the well-known repeater and intruder rooms, so we just finished in the intruder room in the previous video. And also let me make sure that recording is going well here. Burp Suite also has several slightly more obscure modules built in. These are what we will be covering in this room. So let's just start the machine. Specifically, we will be looking at the decoder. I wouldn't say decoder is more obscure. Comparer and sequencer. Out of these three, I would say that I use decoder the most, while comparer, maybe decoder and comparer, I use them with the same frequency, while the sequencer I don't use it as much. These allow us to work with encoded text, compare sets of texts. Now you do not necessarily have to go to decoder, because inspector usually allows you to do a lot of the decoding tasks, and also you can decode as you type. Compare sets of text and analyze the randomness of captured tokens respectively. That's for a sequencer. Being able to perform these relatively straightforward tasks directly within Burp Suite can save a lot of time, because you don't have to actually go to encodedecode.org, so base64decode.org, or you just don't have to actually run base64-d in the terminal. So it is well worth the time spent learning to use these modules efficiently. Without further ado, let's jump in and start looking at decoder. Deploy the machine, which is what I did. You should also deploy the attack box. If you're not using your local attack VPN, I'm connected to Burp Suite's VPN here, to TryHackMe's VPN. You should also deploy if you're not using completed. Decoder overview. I've also started Burp Suite here, and I'm in the decoder tab. Allows us to manipulate data. As the name suggests, we can decode information that we capture during an attack, but we can also encode data of our own. Decoder also allows us to create hash sums of data, which is something that I don't do frequently, as well as providing a smart decode feature which attempts to decode provided, that's actually here, decode provided data recursively until it is back to being plain text, like the magic function of CyberChef. So if you didn't know CyberChef, it is right here at this address, gchq github.io CyberChef, last built 22 days ago, and you have a lot of things here to encode, decode, encrypt, decrypt, and all that stuff. Change from one format to another. You can look at their about. If you go to their about, it's probably you can look at their GitHub actually, which is over here. But regardless, let's select the decoder tab from the top menu and take a look at the options. So the box on the left is where we would paste the text. Obviously this is just random stuff. This is where you input your text. As with most other modules, we can also send the data from other sections. So for example, in the proxy tab, HTTP history, we can just look at this get request, for example, and we can just actually maybe take something from here, right click and send to decoder, and this is actually going to be sent to the decoder, and then we can just smart decode, but this is actually plain text. We can encode as URL, for example. So our selection was encoded as URL. We can control A, encode as URL, and it's actually going to encode everything. We can just smart decode. It's going to actually decode it back to the original. We have options to select between treating the input as text or hexadecimal byte values. At the top of the list on the right, further down the list, we have the drop down encode, decode, or hash, of course. So encode, decode, or hash. Finally, the smart decode, which is what we've talked about previously. As we add data in the input field, the interface will duplicate itself, containing the output of the transformation. We can then choose to operate on this using the same options. So data is actually encoded as URL probably. So if we do data, it's going to be encoded as URL 6044. So it's capital data or not. Capital data 4461 7461. We will look at available transformations in the upcoming tasks. We have familiarized ourselves with it. Then encoding, decoding. How are we on time? 5 minutes. Let's do 5 to 10 more minutes. Let's take a closer look at the manual encoding options. There are the same whether we chose the decoding or encoding menu. So we have plain URL, HTML, base64, ASCII, hex, octal, binary, and gzip. Plain text is what we have before performing any transformations. Not necessarily, because if you just send some encoded stuff into the decoder from repeater, intruder, proxy, or from whatever other section of Burp, you might have an encoded or encoded actually text. URL encoding is used to make data safer to transferring the URL of a web request. It involves exchanging characters for their ASCII in hexadecimal format preceded by a percentage symbol. URL encoded is an extremely useful method to know for any kind of web app testing. For example, let's encode the /. This is what you get, %2f. We can confirm this by typing a / in the input box, then select encode as URL. HTML encoding. In this situation, involves replacing some special characters with an ampersand followed by either a hexadecimal number or a reference to the character being escaped, in this case a quote. A semicolon, for example, a quotation mark, a quote, so ampersand, quote, semicolon. When this is inserted into a web page, it will be replaced by a double quotation mark. Allows special characters in HTML to be rendered safely, and it actually prevents attacks such as XSS in some situations. And in other situations, you can, of course, bypass those restrictions. When we use the HTML option in the decoder, we can encode any character as its HTML escape format. For example, we can decode a quotation mark. You have base64, of course, you have ASCII text, you have hex, octal, and binary, and gzip, as we've said. So if you encode something as gzip, if we go back here, testing gzip, and you actually encode as gzip, you'll get this. You get the hex, but you can actually get the text, of course. We can layer any of these on top of each other. You can just decode as gzip, then you can then encode as gzip, so it's gonna do the same thing. So you're actually layering them on top of one another, which is what it said here. When combined, these methods give us a great deal of control over the data we're encoding. So input data in ASCII format is great, but sometimes we need to be able to edit or input byte by byte. For this we can use hex view, which is, so once again, if I do encode or decode this as gzip and then encode as gzip, we're gonna see that by default we're giving the hex values of it. And in this situation, we can actually modify the bytes themselves, which is really useful. Smart decode, this feature of decoder automatically tries to decode encoded text. For example, if we take this and we just actually place it on top in here and then smart decode, it's gonna actually automatically recognize as being HTML encoded and is automatically decoded accordingly. Base64 encode the phrase let's start simple, so we paste that and we encode base64 and just copy that, paste it over here. URL decoded this data, we can just paste, decode URL, copy, paste there, URL smart decode this. We can smart decode 47. Start, so encode this phrase, encoding challenge. Start with base 64 encoding, so we're gonna encode it at base 64. Take the output of this and convert it into ASCII hex. So hex, we have text, let's see if this is what they're actually looking for. Finally, encode the hex string into octal. Take this and convert it to ASCII hex. So I'm not really sure if this is what they wanted. And then this into octal. What do they want? They want it to encode this into octal. Let's see if this is what they're talking about. I'm not really sure, because converted into ASCII hex might have confused me. But that's right. Alright, so this was task number 3 from encoding, decoding. Then we have the hashing. This is going to be interesting, and I think that we're going to let that for the next video. So we're going into hashing, because it is better to just take steps sequentially and learn like single concepts per video. I find that it's actually more digestible, so to speak. So we're gonna go into the hashing in the next video.